Okay, now it's live.
There we go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This is the Making Space for the New, how YA trends predict cultural shifts in SFF. My name is Naseem Jamnia. I'm today's moderator. We have some wonderful panelists that we will be talking about YA literature, specifically speculative literature, and maybe dip a little bit into other kinds of speculative literature as well. Before we get started, I wanted to say a brief disclaimer, which is that CoNZealand Fringe has been created as a complementary programming series to the annual science fiction convention Worldcon. So all of the live streamings take place outside of the core CoNZealand programming hours. They're not official CoNZealand programming items, and the Fringe is not endorsed by the official convention as well. So let's get started with some introductions. If you want to take it away.
Sure. Tēnā koutou. I'm Whiti Hereaka. I'm in New Zealand. So that's why I'm looking a bit ghostly, because it's still dark here. The sun is just rising. I'm an author. That's why I'm here. I'm also Maori. So I whakapapa, which means my family comes from Ngāti Tūwhare Toa, Te Arawa, Tūharangi, Ngāti Whakaue, and I'm also Pākehā, which means white New Zealand as well. So I'm a bit of a mix of New Zealand. So yeah, you've got, I guess, the best of, not the best, but the mix of New Zealand here. And hopefully you can understand my accent. I will try and speak clearly, because New Zealanders are notorious for mumbling, so I'll try not to do that. But kia ora, thanks for joining us this morning.
You have a delightful accent, for what it's worth. Kath?
Hi, I'm Katherine Inskip. I am the current editor for Cast of Wonders, the young adult genre fiction podcast. For my day job, I'm an astrophysicist, and I am a mum to autistic kids, and I'm autistic myself. That's probably all you need to know. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm in the UK. Yeah.
Also delightful.
All right. I'm Melissa Caruso. I'm an author of adult fantasy, including the Swords and Fire trilogy, and now the first book in the Rooks and Ruin trilogy, The Obsidian Tower, is out now. But my books are published as young adult in some other countries. They were written as sort of crossover, and I have two teen daughters who we're always sort of sharing books with and finding good recommendations for. So
I love that. I wish this is off tangent, but I wish I read books with my parents in that same way. My dad did read Harry Potter with me, but J.K. Rowling is a TERF, so now we don't talk about her.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome all. Welcome our wonderful viewers. We're so excited to get started. I think this seems like kind of a silly question, as I imagine all of us are familiar, but I think it would be a good starting place to talk about what speculative YA fiction is and is not. So if anyone wants to kind of take away, when you hear speculative YA or YA SFF, what are the things that you're like, oh, this is definitely the core of the genre, and these are the things that the genre covers, versus these are things that perhaps other genres cover, and does that matter? Anyone want to take away?
That's a big question.
Somebody has to say something first. Okay. I'll jump in then. So, I mean, we're a short fiction market at Cast of Wonders, and we probably have one of the broadest definitions of YA out there. So we don't always look for stories that keep to the younger age protagonists, or strictly to YA themes. So we have a mixture of what would be recognised as classic YA and marketed as such in longer works, but also a range of stories which are accessible to an audience in the 12 to 18 age range. But what we look for in our stories is for change, for novelty, for the experiences which will resonate with teens finding their ways into adulthood. And that doesn't necessarily map always onto the younger protagonists. So that's where we sit.
Yeah, I'm always a bit confused about where YA is. For me, the story is the story. So similar in what Katherine said, that the kind of story where you're finding your voice, you're finding your identity, to me feels YA. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the protagonist is in that kind of age band for me. So yeah, I'm always like, is it YA or not? I'm not sure. And also, so many adults enjoy reading YA. It seems a bit odd to kind of, well, in New Zealand anyway, it feels a bit ghettoized to be called a YA book. Like, people don't take it as seriously as they would an adult book, even though there's just as much or sometimes even more work put into that kind of story. So yeah, I'm always about, I don't know what YA is. So it's nice to hear what other people have to say. Tell me what YA is, please.
I know for me, as someone who my debut novel I originally wrote as young adult, and I revised it to be adult. So I had to really ask myself a lot. And then with my new trilogy, I had my editor going, can you make it a little less YA for this one? And so I had to, the question of, okay, what is YA has been a very practical concern for me. And I think that you really hit on it with that sense of, with the young adult, usually your character is still discovering their identity and their place in the world and making that, and often seizing it, which is part of why it's so exciting. Whereas adult, you're more likely to have a character who has an established place in the world, knows what it is, and that may change, but they're starting from a place where they have already have a sense of who they are and what they're doing. And also, I think just in terms of what teens like to read. I think pacing is really critical to young adult. I think when you get into adult, particularly fantasy, you'll have these the books where, like, okay, well, the first 5 chapters are really just world building, and like it will be, yeah. So, and I think you also wind up with a lot more. And I don't think this is necessarily to YA, but I think that right now, traditionally, you tend to wind up with a lot more emotion and a lot more emotion-driven decision-making in young adult, where we expect that it's okay for young adult protagonists to impulsively be like, well, no, screw it, I'm doing this right now. We won't necessarily let adult protagonists get away with the same.
That's absolutely summed up. I've got 3 words just in my notes: pacey, authentic, heartfelt. And it's that driven storytelling. And I think it is unique to YA because if at both ends of the age range, because if you look down towards middle grade stories, they often come with a much stronger sense of certainty in the character's identity. There's less questioning, less reflection, less internal doubt about what the story is going to be. You get a fun, straightforward romp. So YA is full of nuance, and I really love that about the genre.
Yeah, I think one thing that's frustrating, like it's in New Zealand, it's definitely in the States too, where if you say that you read YA or write YA, there is such a that's a good question. We can talk about that next. There's such a like a visceral reaction, right? Like it is meant to be for teens, right? This is an age range that the market is for teens, but I read a lot. Most of my shelf is YA. Most of it is speculative YA as well. It's what I read, it's what I write, it's what I enjoy. And I think that sense of discovery is a big part of it. And it doesn't stop at any point. So
I think you're also more likely to see first or even second person protagonists in there, just to give that sense of immediacy.
Yeah.
So we have a question that I think that this is an interesting question. Has there been a shift over the years in the topics and themes of YA literature and in speculative YA? Which I would say yes, but I want to hear from you guys.
I feel like when I was a teen, it was barely a thing. I think that I kind of went from the kids section to the adult section at like age 12, which was interesting in fantasy back then because you're like, Anne McCaffrey looks good. Whoa, what are you doing?
Those dragons.
So I think that and I think that that influx, also how it's shifted, so the readership does have a large number of adults now, and I feel like it's also crept older to that influence, which is, as someone with younger teens, I kind of miss that. I kind of wish that there would be more. That it could be more filled in at that bottom end of the range too. Because sometimes I feel like we're we're drifting towards what adults want from teen books,
Yeah.
and a little bit away from what teens, especially younger teens, want from teen books sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. Yeah.
I mean, thinking back to what I read when I was in the YA age bracket, I also read a heck of a lot of Anne McCaffrey, all of the usual things like Eddings and Pratchett. Half of my year group were completely obsessed with V.C. Andrews' Flowers in the Attic, which is majorly problematic in so many ways. But again, those are things that some would be marketed as YA these days, some wouldn't. But I think one of the shifts is a lot of what was consumed by younger readers was a little bit more frivolous and juvenile in tone, more of the sort of standard derivative fantasy fodder type stories. And YA today is much more sophisticated. It still really engages the YA audience and the readers, but it challenges them. It questions it. Yeah, it's different to how it used to be.
I guess for me in New Zealand, I mean, again, there wasn't a lot of YA when I was growing up, so same sort of thing. But what's exciting now for me is that we've got more own voices coming through. So Maori, Pacifica, who are writing in this space. And yeah, kind of going back to the question before, like, what is YA? When I was working on my first YA novel with an editor, I was pushing against the YA label because of what I said before about, not being taken seriously and whatever. And she said, well, actually, if you think about your reader, who is your ideal reader? And I was like, oh, well, a 16-year-old girl, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, see, that's a YA. So yeah, I'm writing for me in the past, for the kids that are here now. So I think that's really exciting, having, a kind of diversity. I know that's sort of like a big buzzword now, but yeah, actually having actual diversity within, and I don't want to call it a genre, but
I mean, it's tricky because YA is an age range, right? And it's a marketing tool, and it's very much decided by publishers. And as like YA as we understand it now really took off with Harry Potter, in particular the Hunger Games, right? So like very relatively recently. Also not what I was reading in the 90s when I was growing up, except for Tamara Pierce. I have always read Tamara Pierce at the appropriate age. So some other people in the comments have mentioned that like YA didn't exist when they were growing up either. And I think it's really exciting that it is existing now. And I'd love to transition into the topic of own voices, because at least for me being, on like in the kid lit community, it's really leading the charge in publishing to be inclusive in fiction. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on like what YA is doing, what YA speculative fiction is doing in that regard as well.
Yeah, well, I guess, again, sorry, this is very New Zealand centric from me, but I guess that's why. But
that's important, because usually we're talking from a US perspective. So I think it's really nice that we have a different perspective as well.
Yeah, well, for a lot of our readers, we get a lot of media from the US, the UK, Europe. And so now coming back and having our own writers, and particularly Maori writers in speculative fiction for YA, it's really exciting to see characters that look like us, that speak like us, and familiar kind of backdrops too. One of the books that I helped just a little bit, I mentored Steph, is Flight of the Fantail. It's by Steph Matuku, and that's very much based in this country. The twist at the end, which is, I'm not going to tell you, but it's very much grounded in our myths and our pūrākau. So it explains the universe in a very Maori way, very New Zealand way. And that's really exciting, because we never, well, for a long time, we didn't see that. And it's the shift of what Maori literature is as well. For a long time in New Zealand, Maori literature could only be, well, people would push it in this box where it was only about the traditional stories, or it was about old people, or it was about urban Maori missing their former lives. So it's really exciting to have these, particularly in YA. It seems YA is leading the charge in New Zealand as well, to push out those boundaries. So yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's perfect, Shannon. Thank you so much. Oh.
I know for me, one thing that's really exciting is as the mom of 2 lesbians who have told they're out, so they told me I checked with them to make sure they're okay with me mentioning just the fact that I can get them books targeted at teens where they see themselves. So many, we have choices.
Yeah.
Like, well, here's the one lesbian book. Here you go. I ask people for recommendations, and I can be like, here's a list of like 20, 30 books. Look through, and it's so fantastic to have that, and to have books with multiple queer characters and books with all different. It's just they're written by people who are queer themselves, and writing own voices books. And it's as somebody who I'm a biromantic ace, and I grew up with written with any character who was like me, and then be able to grow up with characters like them and protagonists of their own stories is the best feeling ever.
Yeah.
I like that point about like there only being the one book that you can go to, and now there's many choices, which is fantastic, because you might not vibe with that one book,
right?
It's still like, oh, so I'm not,
and especially
with your stories,
and them not being all just issue books anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think one of the things which has driven a lot of the diversity in YA is the sort of the fandom activities of teens and young adults themselves. So it's always hugely dynamic, continually evolving, jumping from platform to platform to platform. And there's no scope for all of the sort of the older traditional elements of science fiction, literary fandom to they just become very irrelevant, because everything is evolving in its own direction. And I think this has really allowed YA to thrive. I mean, it's in this position where it does get looked down on and seen as less by adult SFF at times, but that oversight can really be an advantage, because there's no obligation to follow the same path as adult science fiction. You do your own thing. You find what works for you. You share what you're really excited about, and just that phenomenal fandom voice is just the community is shaping the creative work as much as it goes in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's definitely like more to be done, right? Like as a queer trans person of color, I'm still searching for books that are just like queer trans people of color, doing our thing. So I definitely feel that. Although this is an interesting point, because Melissa, I think in our email conversations had brought up this idea that like as our teens become writers, they're consuming different media, and they're going to create different media, which I find fascinating. Like I don't know what they're going to produce, but I'm really excited for it.
My older daughter's writing a novel right now. And it's interesting to me. Both of them actually are, storytellers in various ways. And they're talking about post-apocalyptic stories. I think is really interesting given everything we're going through now. I feel like, the previous generation was writing dystopias. Arguably predictive. And now my kids are talking about writing post-apocalyptic stuff after everything that we're going through. I just think I don't know. It could be a coincidence. It's sample size of 2, but I just thought that was interesting. And also related to what Katherine was just saying, I think that one advantage that young adult has is because it's at least nominally targeted at teens. You always have this new perspective coming in the readership. I think one thing that adult SFF can suffer from, you almost have the split where there's all this new exciting stuff being done all the time in adult science fiction and fantasy, but there's also this large section of the audience that is very focused on the past, you can see it in the split from Hugo's last night, where the ceremony was kind of focused on the past, but the winners were very much reflective of the present. And I think that is something that YA is largely not burdened with. Like, people aren't like, no, we must only revere the founding heroes of YA, where people are always just inherently looking for something new, which is an advantage, and which is not to say that new work isn't being done in science in adult. It really is.
Yeah, it totally is.
It's overlooked because you'll have people always say, "Oh, recommend a good book," and they're recommending the same books that were published 30 years ago because it's what people, because they're 50-year-olds and they're like, "Oh, this is what I loved when I was a kid."
Right.
So that's stuck with me. But whereas with teens, it's like, this is what I love right now because I am a teen. You get a little bit more of a current vibe, a lot more of a current vibe.
Yeah, even teens today. I mean, like I guess I wasn't a teen that long ago. It's getting longer every day, but even when I was in high school in the early 2000s, like it's so radically different than the way it is now. 10 years has made it. That was at the point where it was still a big deal if someone came out, and now everyone's like, I'm gay, you're gay, we're all gay together. And I think it's wonderful. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's fantastic. So.
That's one of the best things I've seen. I mean, my husband's a teacher and he's gone from teaching in an environment where you could not even allude to the concept of homosexuality to schools being comfortable with students identifying or being however they are, and it's so much more accepting as an environment in general. And I think that's what makes it so sad that there are elements sort of pushing back against that now, but we don't need to go there.
Yeah. Positive. It's good.
Good. Okay, let's see. That ended at a kind of like natural lull that I wasn't expecting.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make a quick check of the comments, which I am reading, by the way. I am reading your comments. So, so we mentioned, actually, since you brought up the Hugos last night, Worldcon, like as an organization, and I promise this is relevant to YA. Worldcon as an organization, has had like some issues. I think, like, if nothing else, that like Lovecraft is like, let's give a retroactive Hugo to Lovecraft. Like that was a decision I don't think we were looking for. Thanks, Worldcon. Tempest Bradford has a really good thread actually on her Twitter about kind of like the things that Worldcon can be doing better as an institution, and cons in general, and the way it relates to YA, or what I want to ask is, what can speculative YA, like what kind of tools can it give us so that we can create better futures, so that our conventions are better, so that our power structures can get better, our schools, our institutions, like what are the things that future generations are going to be bringing with them based on the YA that they're reading and then creating?
Yeah. Well, I think, like we were saying before, because YA is so grounded in this search for identity and who you are and claiming your voice, that it's sort of inherent within it that you're going to teach, I guess, the skills to question structures that we have around us. So I think, has been one of the strengths of YA, that it does give young readers the tools to be able to say, hey, actually, this isn't right, and we can imagine a different world. So they can do it in a safe place first, which is within a novel, and then go out and, as we've seen, go out into the world and actually action it, which is exciting.
It is very exciting.
Revolution. Sorry.
I agree.
I think it's also,
Yes.
I think that one wonderful thing about particularly the increasing diversity of young adult right now and middle grade is that kids who are raised with fictional, like not everybody is in a community where necessarily they're going to see a diversity of people around them. But people who are raised with fictional characters who are their imaginary friends, who are diverse, they get that experience too. Like I feel like there's a whole generation of kids now, and this is upper middle grade, not young adult, but who just, things are so much easier when they meet somebody who is trans and non-binary and they've read the Magnus Chase books by Rick Riordan, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. Like Alex is gender fluid, so now I'm not, this is a familiar concept to me. I'm not just like, what? And I feel like you can, it's something where they can genuinely save lives and reset people, even if they're not getting from their parents that degree of acceptance or that awareness that we live in a diverse world with all different kinds of people, if they're getting it from their books, you know, they're going to grow up with that, and then they're going to expect that. Like, I know my kids who have grown up, you know, I mean, we're in Massachusetts. It's not the most diverse community on the planet, but because they've grown up with more diverse books, they notice things like, wow, that's a bunch of old white guys on that, you know, notice that.
Kids are all right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that, and also in terms of what we can do to make our organizations better, I mean, honestly, the more young people we get involved in organizing, the better. Like, you know, it's very easy to say, okay, the people with the most experience should do it, but the people with the most experience are also going to be the people who are most in the past. By definition, I'm saying this as someone who's 45 years old. More younger people involved and brought in, and I think that that's going to bring more current ideas with it, and more and just a more equitable way of looking at things.
One thing I've seen in the UK is a shift in some of the con culture. I mean, it's like most aspects of the future is very unevenly distributed. But for a number of years, we had a fantastic convention, 9 Worlds, which ran in London, which was really inclusive, very, very open. It didn't quite manage to get everything right, particularly with accessibility for disabled people. And there are a lot of lessons that were learned from that, but it did shape a lot of the wider UK fandom and how conventions operated in other aspects of science fiction and fantasy in the UK. And I certainly took things I learned from attending conventions like 9 Worlds into science conferences. That's the word. They're not conventions, they're conferences. So
I think I use conventions, so I'll take responsibility.
Yeah. So sort of running a physics education conference with my colleagues, like, no, we can do better with inclusivity and respect for the needs of our full community. And I think that has really helped improve the way cons operate. And having those young, those new, those fresh voices does make a big difference. Of course, for every 9 Worlds, there's a DashCon. So you can't lose all of that continuity of experience, but certainly Worldcon and many other roving conventions, they do have a tradition of starting everything afresh, reinventing the wheel, making the same mistakes again and again and again. And I think we need to learn from that. We need to stop doing that. We need to keep inviting new voices in, listen to what our audiences want, but also value the expertise without lionizing it just because it's old.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
In Māoritanga, we've got a concept which is Manakitanga, which loosely translates to hospitality. And so when we meet in a formal way, but Manakitanga gives responsibility both to the hosts and to the guests. So there's responsibility for the hosts to make the space safe, to make everyone feel welcome. But there's responsibility for the guests as well to reciprocate that. And then within that safe space, it's expected that it's challenged. It's expected that that everyone coming together will set how the meeting, how this hui is going to function. So I think, looking at some of the older, maybe indigenous ways of doing things rather than from a Western point of view might help with this inclusive thing. It's all about starting from the bottom up with everyone contributing. So yeah, if you start with having a diverse range of people organizing, start with actually accessibility is really important, and we need to think of that from the very beginning, not tack on at the end. From the very beginning, how are we going to deliver that? I think that would make things more exciting. So, and I think young people in particular already have some of that just ingrained in them naturally, just questioning how things are going, and actually my mate needs to come in here too, so let's make this space more welcoming for them. So yeah, I think I agree with Katherine that if we bring more young people in to the organizing space, but first of all we need to make it safe and welcoming for them to do that,
right?
Then conferences will be amazing.
I know. Yeah, I think there is I think Shannon put in FIACon is coming up, and that's going to be online, which I'm very excited about. It's run by the Black Speculative Magazine. Am I even pronouncing that right? That's how I've pronounced it. So I hope that's the correct pronunciation. And if I remember correctly, I think the prices are fairly reasonable because as Bree, I'm imagining you go by Bree, but as Bree Read Books said, that like $90 is expensive for a teen, right? I mean, it can be expensive for a young adult. I volunteered a lot as a kid, but I didn't get my first job until after I graduated high school. And up until then, my allowance was like $1 a week. Thanks, Dad. So you know, I think that it's you know, a barrier to entry to anybody who has you know, who to a lot of people, but also especially to the teens. And when we want to create a space for them, we have to keep that in mind, right? Yeah. And I love this idea of starting bottom up. I think there's so much Indigenous knowledge around the world that, you know, as like settlers, we have ignored and we have maligned. And if we can, you know, do better on that front, like you know, we can build a better world, I think, in general. So I agree. Okay. That makes sense. Pronunciation. Faya. Okay. Faya. Good stuff. So, you know, okay, we're talking about like the things that we think that the genre can help us do. What are the problems now then, besides the fact that like conventions are expensive, but you know, in like the publishing industry, for instance, of YA speculative fiction and related industries around that, what are the issues that we see and how can we address them?
Gatekeeping. I think it's very much still an issue with gatekeeping, with systemic bias, unconscious bias, and actual acknowledged bias for some people. I don't know if I have a solution to that in general. Speaking just for Cast of Wonders, we have shifted to anonymous submissions. We flag up, we ask submitting authors to flag up if their stories are own voices, if they are young adult authors themselves, if they are from a demographic group which is marginalized in publishing. And that allows us to give a little bit of a pause in our editorial process to think about whether we're bringing our own biases and lack of context to that story, so we can take a more considered look or get specific readers to take a look at it. But it's continually an uphill struggle because there's a huge amount of privilege involved in publishing and the people who submit their stories, their novels. And most of the work we get is phenomenal. We can only take a tiny fraction of it. And if you are from a marginalized group, then you do have a lot of hurdles in your way. So we've got a long way to go as a whole, I think.
I think, you know, definitely another way to help with that is more editors and people who have the power to make decisions in publishing, especially in the larger houses, who are of color or from marginalized backgrounds. I mean, you can really see the difference. I know, you know, I'm published with Orbit, and Orbit has a couple of some great editors of color, and lo and behold, they publish a lot of adult fantasy by authors of color, and you know, and that's not. I feel like that's not a coincidence. You know, you're going to have a lot. You're less likely to run into "I didn't connect" when you have people who aren't just like from a totally white bread background. You know, reading the stories and deciding what gets published. And on you know, and a totally separate answer to the question of why I, you know, as I touched on earlier, I know for me as the parent of teens, I would love to see. I feel like there is a gap currently in the books that are getting published for kids who are ready to move for something, move beyond middle grade. I mean, I personally think adults can read middle grade, but you know, in addition to reading middle grade, which is great, that they can, they're ready to move into young adult, but they're not yet like 17, 18 years old, and they want, and they still want something that's fun, and not necessarily hugely romance centered. Like I know my teens have been like, well, you know, I'll get them these great young adult books that are wonderful books, but they're like, wow, it's just like really heavy angst and very dark and very romance focused, and that's not necessarily something they're ready to connect with when they're like, you know, they haven't had any romantic relationships themselves, and they're not necessarily like, I mean, not everybody's even really into that older teen.
Sure.
And I feel like these days, teens, at least my kids and their friends, are less angsty in some ways than previous generations. I don't know.
My generation as a millennial, very angsty.
And I feel like
very emo in high school.
YA now, and it's very angsty. And I feel like, you know, some of the Gen Z kids, at least, are like they're a little less eager to wallow in the feelings than the grown-up millennials who are still reading YA. You know, and it would be nice to see, like, I know I'm always on the hunt for more like younger, fun, light young adult for my teens, and I'd love to see more filling that gap for like the 12 to 15, 16-year-olds.
We were talking about parents and children reading the same books. My eldest, about a month ago, finished June Harley's Dragon Pearl, which is, I think it skews a little bit more towards the middle grade age range for me. But again, that is phenomenal fun, not heavy on romance, and it's just a cracking read.
My kid loved that one.
I guess getting back to how we can support it, I'm part of the Maori Literature Trust here in New Zealand, and one of our programs is called Te Papa Tupu, which we take 6 emerging Maori writers and we give them a mentor and we give them some money and give them 6 months.
Money is good.
Yeah, give them money,
Give them money,
to help produce work. So that's where this book came from. I've also mentored some other people. JC Hart, who is in the comments I noticed before, is her book's coming out through that program as well. So it's not specifically for YA authors, although we've had YA authors and middle grade authors come through. But that's something I think that you can help if you want diverse books, is actually support the writers when they're first coming through. Give them someone who's been through the ropes to say, yeah, this is really hard, but you can do it, because I've done it, and I'm you know, what am I, a hack? So you can do it too.
I think it's pretty cool, but
nothing. I wasn't fishing. Keep going. No, so give them some support. Give them opportunities, open doors for them. I noticed that Cassie said that you leave the door open for someone, and more than that, you actually put your hand through and say, "Come on, come with me. I'll show you. Come with me this way." So that's something we could do. Even as authors, you could find someone just to say, I'll give you some support, maybe not financially, but just having someone to talk to and say, is this right? What am I doing? I feel so alone. Yeah,
there are some
like that.
Yeah, there are some good mentorship programs. Pitch Wars has recently, in the past few years, kind of have restructured to bring more inclusive, like, staff kind of at the helm. That's been a great one. I've participated in Author Mentor Match. I had a fantastic mentee last year who is queering right now, and his book is so good. And I think, I think a big part of also what I hear, though, is like I think it's important for, for marginalized people to lift each other up, certainly. I also think it's definitely important for people in privileged positions to lift us up, because people tend to listen to them more, unfortunately. I think that's a big thing. But finding somebody who knows your experience, particularly, I think, if another marginalized author is like it's like, look, I did it, let me reach my hand back out and help you. I think can be really, really meaningful when then they also see your experiences if you do struggle. So. Cool. I am jotting down the books that we're mentioning, so I will put that on there.
Look for Butcher Bit. Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if privileged people would do that, but I'm not waiting around for them to do that for me.
Fair.
Because they don't. So yeah, I hope one day they will and recognise their privilege. But yeah, I can't wait for that. That's lifetimes, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I don't have that time to wait for them. So yeah, try and make it our own thing, I guess. And again, that goes back to what we were saying before. We've got this space where we're sort of overlooked, so we can do whatever we want. We can have the cool party here and let them do whatever they want over there.
Yeah, no, we just have to get higher up in the echelons of publishing, which people are doing, right? Like people are definitely moving up and they're doing really, really wonderful work. So
but hopefully remember your roots so you don't turn into the gatekeepers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Keep opening doors. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, like as awful as a space that Twitter can be, at least in like the kidlit book community, I've met incredible people through it who have been so super supportive. When I was querying, I had a lot of people help me. I try to help people as well. So like, at least in that, besides when everything like blows up over a Twitter scandal or whatever, and for the most part, we tend to be like a very supportive bunch, which I think is incredible. And I'm really, really grateful for all the people who have helped me on my journey. And I hope I can pay that forward too, because people deserve it. So I'm particularly excited for more teens some people are publishing so young now. I'm like, I'm about to turn 29 and I'm like, I have been on submission for so long. But I'm very happy for them because I'm so excited when I hear stories of like, oh, like I published this book at 19 and people are paying attention to it. Like imagine what that person's going to do in 5 years or 10 years. I think that is really incredible.
I'm looking towards my bookshelf, but I can't put my hand on it. We have a young writer in New Zealand. His name's Ben Spears. Spears. I can't remember how to say his name. I'll sort that out. And he's just released his second novel, and he's 14, I think.
Oh wow!
So
cool.
Yeah. So and he's writing a series. So it was amazing. I went to his book launch. I was like, how?
Oh my god!
How do you exist?
I don't want anyone to read the things I wrote when I was 14.
Our most recent episode at Cast of Wonders is from Ashley Bow, a young author, and it's an amazing story. And we've just yesterday sort of closed to subs for a young author only submissions call, and it's just so exciting reading all of this amazing work that young people are doing and knowing that we're going to be able to give it a home. So
that was awesome. Yeah, and I'm glad that these opportunities are coming to teens and accessible for teens, because I think I had no idea. I didn't even know that an agent was a thing when I was 14. Like I didn't know until after I graduated college. Like, oh, I can't just like send this to an editor. Someone has to. There's usually not always, right? Not always with all publishing houses, but there's usually an intermediate step. But the kids these days are all right. Like they're doing things. There seems to be good opportunities for them.
I think Clarion were running some workshops specifically for teens earlier in the year, which looked really good.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to open it up to Q&A soon, but before we do that, I wanted to ask what you are reading, what YA SFF or YA in general, or speculative fiction in general, or just in general. What are you reading? What do you recommend? What are some exciting books that are on the horizon for you?
I've been reading more adult lately because I write adult, and right this very moment I'm reading The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrew Stewart, and it is incredible. So definitely recommend that. And I'm trying to think of I don't know what the last I've been reading mostly adult for now. I want to think of some good YA to recommend, but maybe somebody else can. So.
Yeah, I'm reading a bit of adult at the moment. So I'm reading, she has it right next to her. I'm reading Night at the Movies by Robert Coover, which is because I'm interested in like doing weird things with genre. So and this does that. So that was good. And I've just finished Ridley Walker, which is she has that too. Ridley Walker, which is a post-apocalyptic book, but written in very strange English, which is fantastic and mind-blowing. YA again, I'm just gonna pimp Steph Matuku's book. Awesome. But also Kelly Black, who is an Australian and New Zealand author in the dark spaces, which I think would appeal to your teens that aren't like fully into the romance type of thing. Is a bit more action in the kind of not action way. So that would work too. That's it for me.
YA wise, at the moment it's a lot of slush reading. I completely fell in love with Fran Wilde's Riverland, which tore out my heart and stomped all over it. and it just connected and sort of hit me in a way that it really sort of took me back to reading Susan Cooper's Seaward when I was a kid. So I absolutely love that one. What I'm looking forward to, I've just backed the Kickstarter for Rebuilding Tomorrow from 12th Planet Press, which is a sequel to Defying Doomsday, a post-apocalyptic anthology featuring disabled and chronically ill protagonists, which we need more stories featuring. My own reading, I'm in sort of sequel town at the moment, so Fonda Lee's Jade War, Juliet McKenna's Green Man series, they're sort of eating my time at the moment.
Yeah, I feel that. I like pulled up the like list of like I meant to have like a stack of the books that I recommend. So like my friend Rosie's book, A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, came out about a month ago or so, hit the list. I am very excited to actually finally dive into that. Girl Serpent Thorn just came out as well, and I haven't read it yet because it deals with the exact same myths that my middle grade deals with that I'm on submission, and I like can't deal with it, but it looks gorgeous, and I've heard wonderful, wonderful things about it. And there's also like a lot of sequels that are coming out. The final book in the Black Wings Beating trilogy is coming out by Alex Linden. He's a fantastic human, great author. Let's see, let me look through my list. The Faithless Hawk is coming out, the sequel to The Merciless Crow, which was one of the most inventive and interesting YA fantasies I've read in a while, and I read a lot of YA fantasy. So that was super good. I'm also reading a lot of adult right now because I'm working on my comprehensive exams, and it's my thesis novel is in a crossover space. So, you know, crossover wise, like the Poppy Wars, City of Brass, like two excellent trilogies, one of which is now done, and I'm dying because I haven't read it yet, and I'm dying. I need to read this third book. So yeah, those are, and then there's also Erawan Press, which has been started by Liz Gornsky, who was at Tor Books for a while, has some YA also coming out. One of them is my friend Hannah's book. I'm really, really excited about that, called Skate Racers. Yeah.
Love that book.
So good.
My kids have been reading the YA for me. They love the skate. Like I got an arc of that from and my daughter stole it. She heard Teen Lesbian Witches, stole it out of my hand, had it read within 24 hours. So
cool. I'm going to tell Hannah that. That'll make them really happy. So yeah. Sea Star Summer is a plug that's in line. Cool. I'm going to add it to this list. Sea Star Summer. Yeah, and Erawan also is put in a published. Let me take it. It's called Rise of the Red Hand, which is like a Cli-Fi YA that's coming out in the fall. When does it come out? Oh, in January. Just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I think like this year there have been like a lot of like YA, especially YA fantasy, which is what I prefer to read in speculative fiction. Books that like the second books and third books are starting to come out in the series. So yeah, I could go and find my shelves and be like, okay, and read this one. But hopefully that's a good list. I've typed up some of the recommendations that we've been talking about too, that hopefully we can put up somewhere. So okay, we have a little over. I know. Can you imagine being a kid and your mom is like, here, I have all these books that haven't yet come out. Do you want to read them?
It was all fun and games until she said, "When's the next book coming out?" And I was like, "Oh, honey, the first one isn't even out."
The second book is written, and I think Hannah is drafting or revising the third book. So at least that's already out to the publishers. Yeah. So.
Oh, would I be interested in writing YA in the future? You know, I love YA. I originally was trying to write YA. I don't know. I'm in adult land now, but maybe someday.
Yeah, I find I hope there's more crossover books. So crossover being protagonists that are kind of in this like falling out of teen, going into like new adult, stage, like 18 to 22 or so stage, and some are marketed as YA and are published under YA, and some are as adults, such as City of Brass and Poppy Wars, especially the sequel, I think is very much adult. But yeah, I mean, I think crossover is also like that's a space I really enjoy writing in, and so I hope that space also continues to grow in that space. And then also I think the crossover, the upper middle grade, lower YA space, I think you're right that there feels like there can be more there. But I wonder if that part of that is skewed because so many, a lot of people I know who are writing YA are now adults. So I wonder why, like, that might be why the skew up is. So
yeah, and I'd love to see more the adult YA crossover too, to just help. I feel like there's this vast population of people who only read young adult science fiction fantasy, who and like sometimes it's so easy for them to bounce off of adult fantasy because the first recs they get are going to be like Tolkien or Wheel of Time, and if you're coming from YA, you're just gonna like it's I feel like there are better books to bridge with. I would love to pave that path for people to be able to read both young adult and adult more easily without bouncing off the chunky volumes that aren't really probably what you're looking for if you're coming from a YA perspective.
Yeah, and hopefully, like as adult fantasy and sci-fi is also changing as a genre. It'll become more friendly for people. I read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid, and the only thing I remember is from the movies, and that I put down when it got to Helm's Deep for a year and then picked it back up. I mean, like, they are like very dense, sort of like these classic fantasies. But then there's like N.K. Jemisin, who is rocking the world right now with how cool she is. So, although I don't know if I would have understood Broken Earth as a teen, it is like a very complex, gorgeous series.
Amazing.
And heavy. It's so good. Okay. Anyway, so I want to, if anyone has any questions, please throw them up in the chat so that our wonderful panelists can answer them. We still have about 10 minutes, a little under. Let's see. And if there's anything you guys are like, wait, we didn't talk about this, but I want to insert X thing, please, now is the time as we wait for questions.
Well, as we're waiting for questions, I know I can say in terms of books that do make a good bridge from young adult to adult science fiction fantasy, I know that because I've been recommending some to my teens in particular, because there's no reason teenagers can't read adult. Selective about giving things they're going to
absolutely.
And I know like the Murderbot Diaries books are a fantastic bridge for teens. I think if they like the Spellslinger series by Sebastian de Castell, I'm going to totally maul the de Castell, whatever. I'm sorry. Is a good sort of young adult themed one. If you like romance more, Empire of Sand, I think could potentially be a good one by Tasha Suri. I'm trying to think. There's The Invisible Library by Genevieve Cogman is very that paciness. Let's see. I don't know. Anyone else have any other ones that they recommend for?
I love False Meadows books as well. Accident of Stars and A Tyranny of Queens. A lot of that was because it was the first time I'd seen characters with vitiligo. So that's a skin condition I have. I'm very, very pale because most of my skin doesn't have any pigment at all. And I'd only ever seen it presented badly in a very derogatory way by David Eddings. So I instantly fell in love with these books.
I'm trying to remember Eric Smith's, I think it was his third book. The Girl in the Grove also has, the main character has vitiligo, so I recommend that one. That one is a good. That one is a good, more like lower YA. Although there is like a romance theme in it, but it's an environmental justice sort of book, which is very good. Oh yeah. So Eric is also a sweetheart, so everyone should follow Eric Smith. He's great. Someone asked about, so since we talked about over crossovers, thank you, what our thoughts are on new adult, of which I have lots of thoughts, and as an age category that's not like romance centered, but in speculative fiction.
Well, you say you've lots of thoughts. You want to jump in?
Yeah.
I was talking to ZR Eller a few months ago, who's an agent and an author, and his argument is that new adult shouldn't exist because the like millennial experience is now becoming adulthood, and that's that if that was his sort of perspective, which I think is a really, really smart one, and I really like that. One thing I think that new adult can grant us, and I as somebody who kind of is writing in that crossover space, is kind of writing new adult stuff. I think there's like a unique set of experiences that you're not quite a teen and you're not quite like an adult on your own and you're trying to figure your shit out. I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this. You're trying to figure your stuff out. And especially if you go to college or if you're, college age and you're coming out of it and now you're responsible for your own life sometimes, not always, but I think that space, like a new adult, can really speak to that in a way that feels a little above, that feels unfair to put under YA, if that makes sense, right? Like it's issues that teens quite haven't yet dealt with, but so many adult books can be past that. And that's what I think new adult as a genre can offer. Now, I see the argument that like those are still adult experiences; they're just like younger adult experiences. But I think like as a genre, you know, if that were to become an age range for publishers to look at beyond romance, I think that would be how I would envision it.
I think I would disagree with that because
Ooh, go on.
Yeah, I'm going to be controversial and disagree. I mean, one of the things I come from a sort of a European English background, so you do notice the cultural differences between sort of the US side of Western culture and the European side of Western culture, particularly in terms of permissiveness and what's acceptable and what is classed as adult, related to sex, to violence, to profanity. And there are things which define adulthood which are very different globally. So if we're setting new adult as being defined by what is an adult experience rather than a teen experience, I think we need to recognize that adulthood doesn't look the same across the globe. And again, that can skew what we are setting up in terms of expectations of adulthood as an aspiration for younger readers.
Yeah, I'm always confused by new adult because that's sort of not the experience here of what happens. There's not sort of, if you go to university, you're an adult here. I mean, you're still figuring things out, but you're an adult. A lot of the kind of older YA stuff deals with, I guess, adult things. We don't have problems with swearing or sex or drug use or anything like that. So yeah, the new adult thing, I think, is quite a cultural thing rather than a universal experience. I know there is generational experience, and that it's hard for different generations to get whatever this constructed idea of adulthood is. But yeah, I don't think here we would separate the two as much, or even adult. I think there's a lot of crossover in New Zealand, I guess, literary thing between young adult and adult anyway. It's quite grey. There's not really hard. I mean, there's never any hard sort of stratifications, but yeah. So new adult, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. And Melissa, you're also in a U.S. context, so I'm curious whether like what I said resonated with what your thoughts are.
Well, so I feel like the way that we currently, I'm gonna sort of jump to the side here and say that I feel like the way we categorize books could be more useful to people who are looking for a good way to match. I think that age categories themselves can sometimes be tricky in that, like, okay, let's say you're a 15-year-old, you really enjoy middle grade books, but you feel like you shouldn't be reading them anymore. You're an adult, you feel like you shouldn't be reading YA, which is done, but here we are. Or whatever, or maybe you're a teen and you would enjoy some of those adult books and you're certainly ready for them, but you're like, oh, I should be in the teen section. And I wonder if there's a better way to do it where we're enabling people to find things that better match their interests instead of, because your experience of being a teen is going to be different than my experience of being a teen based on all kinds of things. I think people are ready for different things as teens, and looking for different things as teens. And I wonder if, maybe the young adult should be the feelings and identity section.
No, I think that is fair. I'm sorry,
and I think there's also, I get a lot of people asking me, my 11-year-old reads at like a 18-year-old level. They understand the words and things, but the content of those books aren't appropriate
Mm.
for that age. So yeah, going to something that's more what the book is about, the content of it, rather than this is for young adults, or this is for whatever might be helpful too. I know I was reading at a higher age when I was 11, and I probably shouldn't have read Brave New World when I was 11, but I did, and that might have messed things up a little bit.
My husband read it when he was 10 for the first time, so you know, like, I know. Yeah.
So yeah, having resources for kids that maybe are reading above what is appropriate in the books would be an interesting space as well.
Yeah. Okay, we have 1 minute and we had a few questions. So if we'll see if we can answer both of these really fast. Do you think, so the one that was just asked, or that was asked a little earlier, do you think it's beneficial? You know, so many people hate reading classics in school. Do you think it's worth switching to contemporary, not contemporaries in terms of like what's being published, like middle grade and YA instead? And I don't know if in like the UK or in New Zealand, whether whether there are certain like the canons that you also have to read in middle grade and in high school. I know that we did.
We did when I was younger, but it's changed now, and it's a bit of a mix of both. So you do a bit of classic stuff, but you also can choose your own books to read and analyze within classes too. Some of it is really just practical, that schools can't afford to buy new books every time they come through for a class set. So a bit of both.
I know for me, it's a pet peeve, honestly, that my kids are still reading some of the same books that I read when I was in high school and middle school as assigned books. I feel like, I mean, just in their particular district, their summer reading lists were much more open and had much, but when you're reading only the classics and teaching kids in school, teaching them only the classics, you are by definition teaching them a less diverse curriculum, because the stuff that were classics back then are even more so dominated by white straight guys. And I think that it really, I mean, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with teaching some classics. By all means, have one or two in there. But I think you really should be also looking at stuff that's more recently published and not just leaning on the same 30, 40, 50-year-old books all the time, because they're not even resonating with kids now. My daughter had to read Catcher in the Rye in high school, and like what? This has nothing to do with my life right now. Why am I reading this random guy babbling? He's kind of a jerk.
You're giving me flashbacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My kids are much younger. They're not sort of into like high school assigned reading yet, but they have been sort of sent home with Harry Potters and other things. And we have had conversations about what the author is doing and what it shows about the author's biases. And if this happens in real life, this is a type of just trying to sort of keep that awareness running alongside as well. But I think schools are pretty good at keeping current literature in alongside the classics, but it's anything that gets kids reading, to be honest. It doesn't have to be a classic. It doesn't have to be a modern story. Whatever clicks with that particular kid is of value. And I think I just want to applaud all the teachers out there for everything they do. Keep at it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Okay, well, we are out of time, and in the interest of not keeping everyone, I guess we will end it there. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you guys for our wonderful, wonderful panelists. They're super great. We are not in a space where we can clap, but I'm clapping for you. And we are all we all on Twitter or social medias of some kind for people to find us? So we are findable on the internet for other questions or conversations. But yes, thank you everyone so much for coming. Have a great day. Enjoy more of the Fringe Con, and don't be a
Thank you to Naseem for being an awesome moderator.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. This was great. It's been lovely.
I had a great time. I can talk books all day, every day. So,
all right.
Awesome. Okay.